How important is the energy aspect here, or what kind of dimensions are there to it?
Well, the energy dimension is of enormous importance. 20% of the world's oil and gas comes out of the Persian Gulf. It just matters enormously, and everybody understands that if this turns into a long war, it will have disastrous consequences for the world economy. Again, this is one of the principal reasons that President Trump is looking for an off ramp. He likes to talk about opening the Straits of Hormuz. All I can say is good luck on that one. If that was easy, we would have done it earlier. I don't think we can open the Straits of Hormuz. You remember not too long ago, President Trump was talking about escorting tankers in the Persian Gulf. And the Navy basically told them that was not possible. Those naval ships, American naval ships, would be too vulnerable. So I don't think that they can open the straits. The other thing you want to remember is if they actually destroy the petroleum infrastructure in the Gulf states, it doesn't matter whether the Straits of Hormuz is open or not, because there's going to be no oil coming out of the Straits of Hormuz. And if they destroy the desalination plants and the petroleum installations in the Gulf states, there are effectively not going to be any Gulf states left. I mean, the point is that the Iranians have options here. They can play hardball, and the consequences would be devastating for the Gulf states. And as I say, then it wouldn't matter whether the straits are open or not. But I don't think we're going to open the straits anyway. I don't think we're going to put naval ships in the Persian Gulf either. So I think in a very important way, the Iranians are in the driver's seat. Clint, if I can just make a historical point that gets back to an issue that you were raising before, having to do with escalation dominance and air power, and even decapitation. If you go back to the period before World War I, as we all know, wars before World War I had no air dimension. Wars were fought between armies and navies. And it was in World War I where we first saw air forces employed by the fighting forces in Europe. Then after the war, this is in the 1920s and the 1930s, this is before World War II, you developed independent air forces. And those air forces became very interested in strategic bombing. And strategic bombing is another way of saying long range bombing. And the idea was, and this was, of course, popular in the air forces of the world and among Air Force thinkers, that an Air Force by itself could independently win a war. In other words, you would no longer have to win that war on the ground or at sea. You could just take your Air Force and you could hit the other country's homeland. You could hit its economy, you could hit its population, you could hit its military forces, whatever. And you could bring that country to its knees with air power alone. And in a very important way, we tested this in World War II. And we have tested this theory many times since. Now, there's still some people who believe you can do magical things with strategic air power, which again is another way of saying with air power alone. But the fact is, there are real limits to what you can do. There's no question that you want to have a powerful Air Force if you go to war. And there's no question that in some cases, strategic bombing helps win a war. But strategic air power by itself cannot win a war. It just can't. The historical record is unequivocally clear on this. So when you go to war against a country like Iraq in 2003, you definitely use air power. You remember shock and awe, Glenn. That was the American Air Force pounding Iraq before we sent the ground forces in. Strategic bombing came before the ground forces went in. But the fact is, to create regime change and win a decisive victory in Iraq, we had to use land power. we had to send in ground forces. We couldn't do it with air power alone. Fast forward to the present. This is a campaign where we have no boots on the ground. There's no land power. And we're talking about doing it with air power alone. We're talking about doing it with strategic bombing. This is what the decapitation strategy in the opening stages of the war was all about. And when people now talk about going up the escalation ladder, when you talk about Pete Hegseth announcing that we're going to punish Iran more today than we have in any of the previous 11 days, what they're saying is that we're going to win this war with strategic air power, with air power alone. We don't need ground forces. Well, the historical record, again, is unequivocally clear on this. You can't win wars, especially against formidable adversaries, with air power alone. It just doesn't work. So here we are in a world where we have no boots on the ground, and President Trump does not want to put boots on the ground. I mean, serious boots on the ground. Are we going to conquer Iran the way we conquered Iraq? I don't think so. So, of course, the end result is that we're relying on strategic air power alone. And what are we going to do? We're going to punish Iran like it's never been punished before. There's no question about that. You turn the American and Israeli air forces loose on Iran, they're going to do an enormous amount, they're going to inflict an enormous amount of punishment, do an enormous amount of damage to Iran. No question about that. But again, the historical record is clear that countries can absorb that punishment. Look at what we did in World War II. Look at what we did in Korea. Look at what we did in Vietnam. You can inflict massive punishment on civilian populations, and the countries fight on. And in terms of military targets, we're not going to get all those ballistic missiles and drones. They're going to continue to fire ballistic missiles and drones at Israel, at the Gulf states, and at American military assets. So strategic bombing is not going to produce a decisive victory here in all likelihood, unless there's a miracle. And I don't believe in miracles. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this war comes to an end, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I think the historical record is on my side. So when Pete Hegseth and President Trump, talk about escalation dominance and pounding Iran more than ever, don't believe that that's gonna work. It hasn't worked in the past, and there's no reason to think it's going to work now.
Yeah, this is a problem, how to put an end to the war once it starts. I think it was Otto von Bismarck who made the point that it was something along the line that it was easy to lure the Russian bear out of his hive, but difficult to get him back in. You can say the same about the Iranians here, though, because they didn't want this war, but now that it's here, it's very dangerous for them, I think, if it ends on terms which would allow the whole thing to play out yet again. So now, not to draw too many parallels with the Russians again, but I also think that for them now, restoring their deterrent to make sure that no one goes down this path again is, I guess, a key objective. But this comparison to Iraq, though, I mean, even if one would introduce ground troops, Iran is almost 4 times the territory of Iraq, and it has almost twice the population. This is a massive country. I don't know. I thought it was strange that the idea of introducing a few Kurdish troops was somehow going to overrun this country. It's, I mean, as you said, it will contribute probably significantly to disrupt and destroy things. But in terms of if there's an objective besides just causing death and mayhem, then it is unclear. Is this the source of the miscalculation, though? Because the idea that you could regime change a country only with an air force, because there had to be a plan, and it appears to have been regime change. And again, in this country, in Norway, we actually had a political leader of one of the political parties who went out on Facebook or Twitter and actually wrote that, well, now the Iranian regime has fallen because they saw that Khamenei had been assassinated. So that's it. Now the government is over. I mean, is this the kind of the thinking that, you have one bad man if we just kill the bad man, then the regime is gone. It's very hard. It's so remarkably stupid if this is the case. Well, that fact that you have leaders, political leaders, who think in this way, communicate in this way, it makes you think no one's behind the wheel, I guess.
Well, a couple points. I think that the initial strategy, and we have gotten at this issue in our previous comments, but the initial strategy was decapitation. And then if the decapitation didn't work, I believe that we felt that we could punish them in ways that would force them to throw up their hands and surrender. We would have escalation dominance. Uh, and this is another way of saying we thought we could do it with air power alone. Now, very importantly, the administration was told by insiders, two sets of insiders, before the war that this was unlikely to work. You remember that General Kane, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and was handpicked by President Trump to be the chairman, remember, he brought him out of retirement. He was only a three-star general. President Trump brought him out of retirement, made him a four-star general, and made him chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So he was, in a very important way, Trump's general. Much to his credit, General Kane told President Trump that we did not have a viable military option. This is before February 28th. Furthermore, the National Intelligence Council, which is separate from General Kane, did a study before the war that said you're unlikely to get regime change and bring this war to a quick end. This was careful analysis done by the National Intelligence Council, done by insiders. So there were two flashing orange lights, if not red lights, that were in the president's face that he just ignored. And as I said to you before, we have a huge body of literature on air wars and sanctions and regime change that anyone can easily access and easily figure out what the bottom lines are here. It's not a complex literature in the sense that almost everybody agrees that air power alone or strategic bombing doesn't win wars, that sanctions have real limits, that regime change is wickedly difficult. First of all, it's almost impossible without ground forces, but even with ground forces, the whole process is wickedly difficult. The literature is unequivocally clear on this. So when you marry what we know from previous analysis by scholars and policy analysts with the fact that you had General Kane and the National Intelligence Council warning the president not to do this, and when 20% of the American people approved it, but the rest didn't, you want to think about that. Only 20% of the American people were enthusiastic about this war. The other 80% either opposed it or wasn't too sure. To go to war, in those circumstances is quite remarkable. And you just sort of wonder, what was Trump thinking? How could he have possibly done this? And when you look at where we are today, given everything I just said, it's hardly surprising that we're in a real mess and there's no apparent way to get out of it. It's just not surprising. What is happening now is consistent with the historical record. And just to add one more dimension to this, go back to the 12-Day War last June. The 12-Day War between Israel and the United States on one side and Iran on the other side. It was the Israelis and the Americans, not the Iranians, who wanted to end that war after 12 days. Decapitation didn't work in that war. We didn't have escalation dominance in that war. What more evidence do you need before February 28th to tell you that this is a bad idea? But nevertheless, Trump jumped in along with Netanyahu, who of course was pushing him and promising him that we would have a quick victory. And here we are.